Hey, what's going on? My name is Leif Arneson. This is the Vegan Gym Podcast, and today I'm joined by Coach Daniel, who is one of the awesome coaches at the Vegan Superhero Academy. And Daniel, it's just great to have you here, and it's great to be outside in this beautiful place and hanging out with you. So appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Great weather, great area. Excited to be here.
Great. So I'd love to start by going back in time and hearing what was it like growing up in South Africa and how did that kind of shape you as a person?
Well, obviously it's vastly different to here. And the one thing that I would also say is it depends on what parts of South Africa you grew up in, the culture you're born into. There are so many different parts of South Africa. It's kind of called the Rainbow Nation for a reason, because we have 11 different languages. We have 9 different provinces, which I know is nothing compared to the 50 states, but there are so many different aspects of South Africa. It really depends on where you come from. For me personally, I was born into a very poor Afrikaner area, and so what that it's essentially means is you were born and raised to be very, very stereotypically quote unquote manly. You were taught to be tough, hide your emotions. You were taught to brawl, that big biceps, well, education is important, but big biceps are important. Yeah. And so you weren't really taught to be in touch with your emotions or to care to an extent. You were taught to provide, but you're not supposed to care about animals. You're not supposed to care about feelings, anything like that. But I kind of went off the beaten path because it didn't feel correct, even from a young age. Unfortunately, I was raised to be because of apartheid, and my parents grew up in that area. I was raised to be racist. I was raised to be homophobic and sexist, but it didn't feel right from the get-go. When I was in like grade 1, there were only like a handful of white people in my class, and I wanted to have friends, and so I played with people of color because those were my friends. My mother didn't like it, but I mean, I wanted friends, and so from a young age, I just went over the beaten path. My mother wasn't happy, my father wasn't happy, my brother wasn't happy. He was older than I am. But I think that you grow up sometimes as a victim of the area you're in, but it's at the same time you get to make your own choices. And so that kind of stuck with me for a while. Some of the things, such as what does it mean to be a man? And as I grew up, I started meeting older gentlemen, apart from my dad, who was lackluster as a father, I believe, and older gentlemen that you chose to follow. Like my stepfather was a monumental impactful man in my life, and rather than completely ignoring your emotions, he taught me to be in touch with your emotions but not to let them run rampant. So I think that kind of shaped me as a person. But the big thing about South Africa, again, it depends on where you're born, it depends on how you're raised. But the one thing that I will say, I was incredibly blessed compared to other folks in South Africa. I understand that I'm born white, and with apartheid I was born with possibilities and gifts that many in South Africa that are not born with. And I'm very, very thankful and appreciative for that.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about South Africa just from you and just being more curious since you've been on the team. And within the US, you hear little bits and pieces here and there, but we generally don't learn too much about Africa in general and different cultures and South Africa and some of their kind of historical challenges and transformations. So it's really interesting to hear firsthand kind of that experience. And I read the biography by Walter Isaacson of Elon Musk, and he grew up in South Africa. And he just talked about how Elon was constantly bullied and just always got beat up, and a few times to the point where he like almost lost his life. And from the conversation that I had with you earlier today, that was kind of a common experience.
Absolutely.
Could you speak to that a little bit and just share like what was, gets back to kind of that prehistoric manliness and needing to stand up for yourself and could you share a little bit more about your experience in that way?
That's absolutely true, and I guess it'll be individual for every person, but you do see that in South Africa. Still to this day, to an extent, it's getting less, I believe, but it is absolutely true that you were born into an area where you got bullied or you bully, and there was no in between. You either associate with bullies or you associate with those that get bullied. And so you have to find your feet. You have to make sure that you are in quote unquote the right cliques, with you associate with the right people, that you know the right people that are going to stand up for you. And if you don't, you're going to suffer the consequences. So one little neat trick, I was extremely interested in the science of things. I was always very scientifically driven, because from a young age, I kind of learned that if I know something, I don't have to be scared of it. So when I was, I don't know, like 5, I was scared of the darkness, and someone told me it's just an absence of photons. I was like, what's photons? And so that kind of associate, and it still runs into my life at the moment. Like, if I can explain something scientifically, then I don't need to be scared about it. But anyways, and so I was a jock, I guess, in high school, but I didn't like the bullying aspect of it. I didn't like making people feel uncomfortable. It just didn't feel right. And so I started getting really good friends with the quote unquote nerds, the people that are very scientifically and much, much smarter than myself, people that have gone on to be chemical engineers, etc. And so we kind of got to a place where they would help me with my chemistry and my physics. But if they got in trouble physically, I'd be there for them. So one hand covers the other. And that's kind of how we got through high school. And there's still some of my best friends. And even today, I'm considering buying a new iMac. So I just shot my friend a message. And I was like, so which one should I get? I'm in the States. It's kind of cheaper in the States. Which one should I get? But then 2 weeks down the line, he'll message me. And I was like, listen, I'm trying to gain a bit of muscle. What should I actually do? And so we help one another. And I think that's paid dividends for me completely. But what you mentioned about the sheer quote unquote manliness, it absolutely is true. And for certain schools and certain areas in South Africa, it still is true. Like, the biggest wins, the strongest wins. There is no room for art. There is no room for poetry or compassion sometimes. And I think that's a big shame.
How did you kind of learn to develop the compassionate side? Was it just from building relationships with people of different backgrounds? Is that kind of where it started?
I think it started probably with my mother. So my parents divorced when I was very, very young. And so you see a single mom taking care of 2 boys, big boys. And my mom's not a big woman. And so she had to somehow provide. And me and my brother took a photo with my mom a couple of years ago. And we were gigantic next to her. And I just realized how much she had to deal with raising us, because my brother was amazingly stupid. He fell down trees, he broke arms, he was like the full-blown manliness bloke. He was that guy. So he broke arms, he's shattered his cheekbone, I've torn my ear off, I've torn my hamstrings. At some point when I tore my ear, she was in a different country, I phoned my mom and I was like, yeah, so I'm at the hospital, my ear's like dangling off my face. And she just went quiet. She's like, okay, call me when you're home. And I immediately asked me, you're not upset? She's like, at this point, it's what else could happen? I'm so used to this. Wow. So it started with my mother and seeing how she sacrificed for us. I remember there's one of the biggest memories that I have is she was a teacher, obviously. And so she didn't earn a lot of money. And when you draw money from an ATM in South Africa, there's a certain sound to signify that the money is actually going to be was actually coming. It's a grrr sound, makes that sound. And I remember her holding my hand when I was 9 or 8, and she's like, pray for the sound, pray for the sound, pray for the sound. And I kept looking at her. I was like, what do you mean the sound? But at that point, I hadn't realized it's Friday afternoon at 6 o'clock. If she doesn't get this money, she can't feed her children this weekend. And so that kind of started building the compassion, caring about others, putting others first, being there for others. And then I also just associated with people that were those kind of folks. And it just felt right being there for people. And so I've gotten to a place now where one of my biggest fears is someone saying Daniel wasn't there for me. That's one of my biggest fears. And it's something that I try to avoid at all costs, because being there for someone else is basic human manners, in my opinion.
Well said. Yeah, I totally agree. So you grew up on a farm. We'll get into your vegan story in a little bit more detail, but I'd love to hear, how did growing up on a farm really shape your perspective about animals from an early age? So at an early age, you were taught the science of the animals, I guess. So we just spoke about the little animal called a dassie, which is like a rock lyrex or something like that. It's a small little rodent. So we were taught 10 of those is one sheep. So if you shoot 10 of those, we can have one more sheep. Cool. So if you're 6 or 7, they give you a gun and say, go shoot dassies. They tell you, go and get the dassies and give them to people who are less fortunate than you so they can eat it. But they say, shoot. The sooner you get better at hunting, the better. And so me and my father
again, our opinions about a lot of things in life differ so much. One of the only things that we kind of did together was hunting and culling animals, unfortunately. So from a young age, that was what I was doing. I was making sausages, because it's the only thing we could actually sit and talk about. So that was what we did. And so from a young age, I remember one of my vivid earliest memories was culling a sheep for the first time and feeling what that feels like. But at that point, I didn't have the vocabulary to speak what that actually felt like, because I was 7. I just did what I was told. And because of the brutishness, you can't say, like, I don't want to do this, because then you get beat. And because of that whole manliness thing, you just do what other men do. And so that was the reality of a farm. And you were told, like, sure, you respect animals, you can't put too many animals in an area, but the feelings of animals, the compassion to animals, it was never spoken about, ever, not once.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in that kind of environment, but I never really had any attachment to animals from like a compassionate perspective, or I never kind of had any, like, we didn't have any pets growing up, so I never really had any connection to animals beyond just animals are food, animals are here for us. And yeah, I think I've always kind of considered myself to be a compassionate person, and I definitely had that instilled in me from a young age, but that wasn't tangibly associated toward animals in a meaningful way. So how did you get into fitness? What was kind of the start of your journey there?
So up until, I would say, age 16, I was very fat, obese. I was size 44, 46 pounds, 35, 36% body fat. I was overweight. My nickname in high school was Chubby. I was just that kid. I couldn't run a quarter mile without passing out. And it got to a point where I just felt uncomfortable, and I just started running. Point blank, I just started running, like Forrest Gump. And so we had like a little cross country thing around the boarding school, and I just did that twice a day. It was 2 kilometers, which is slightly less than 2 miles, I guess, quite a bit, like 1.5 miles. And I just did that every day, and then slowly started losing weight. Bought like a meal replacement shake, spent all my pocket money on that. I still remember the brand, tasted horrible. And I just slowly started losing weight. And then I suddenly got really tall. I went from, I think, like 5'6" to 6'3" in the span of 18 months. Wow. And I started playing really better rugby, which is a sport that's very common in South Africa. It's very similar to American football. We just don't wear pads, and it's more focused on endurance rather than explosiveness. But we still do use quite a bit of explosiveness, but regardless. And so I ended up playing really good rugby, was first team captain. And then after that, I played for my province. I played for my country and represented on a junior level, and I was about to represent on a senior level, and I got my 8th concussion. And at that point, they told me, listen, if you get another concussion, you have serious hallmarks of developing dementia, so you have to stop. And so I actually fell into Great Depression, and because you lose your identity. You've just been surrounded by 50, 60 other men for the past 3 years playing rugby, and now that's gone completely. You lose all your attachment to it. And I fell into a Great Depression for a couple of months. And again, I was living close to a gym. And someday you just look yourself in the mirror. It's like, no, I want to change this. And so simply went to the gym again, started going to the gym wearing baggy clothes, as a lot of us do in the beginning, feeling a bit scared, feeling a bit intimidated, and doing a bit of cardio, probably too much cardio. Started doing weight training, doing a ton of research, because again, referring back to what I mentioned earlier, if I know something, I don't have to be scared of it. And so I started doing a ton of research, and at this point I'd finished my chemistry degree, and it started getting really interesting, and I developed more, lost more weight, developed more, and eventually it got to the point where I decided I was going to do powerlifting and strongman. Started getting into that, but that required me to eat quite a bit, and I still felt uncomfortable. So I decided to peer off to try physique, just for the fun of it, just like one final push to lose weight. Let's get sub 13% body fat. And I pushed, and I got to 13% body fat, and me and my friend at that point had to change shorts before we went on stage. And I took down my shorts, and he's like, man, your legs are still massive. You should do bodybuilding. I was like, okay, I'll try bodybuilding next year. And it just pivoted to that point. And at that point, I'd already started coaching people around me because I'd gone through that journey that a lot of people have wanted to go through already. I've gone from 315 pounds all the way down to like 215. So I've gone through that massive process, gotten stronger in that process, gotten more fitter, happier, healthier. So I started teaching others, coaching others pro bono, and I started doing bodybuilding, started coaching more, started making a career of it, started doing PT, personal training. Then COVID hit, went completely online. And then we are today. That's essentially the gist of it.
Yeah, and I'd love to get into a little bit more detail on your journey to the vegan gym, but let's touch on your vegan journey first. So we already heard kind of the background in your early experiences with animals and how you felt like that didn't hunting and kind of skinning animals you were just kind of forced into that. So that was at the background of your mind. But what was really the push to veganism?
So that was definitely in the back of my mind, as you say. But I maybe never really tried to get in touch with that childhood feelings again, because I stopped going to the farms. I just stopped going to the farms at some point. And even when I went to the farms, they were like, "Are you going to go hunting?" I was like, "Okay, cool. I'll just stay at home. I have no interest to go outside. To go hunting at 12 o'clock at night. No thanks." But essentially, then we got to a point where I was competing as a bodybuilder, which obviously includes pushing your body weight up quite a bit. And as you should, you go for routine blood tests. And my cholesterol was a bit high. And I was like, okay, well, I understand the science. The obvious solution is to cut out a bit of saturated fat to improve cardiovascular fitness, to improve fiber intake. Let's go vegetarian. It's gonna run me cheaper anyways. And I went vegetarian for a long while. Didn't do as much as I wanted it to. And so obviously the next logical step is to go vegan. And at that point, I was discussing it with friends. And this is probably the one part that puts me apart from any other vegan on the planet for the reason why they went vegan. But we were sitting chatting, and my friend, I think he was probably intoxicated at the point. I didn't drink at all. I was always designated driver, and so he said, "It's a good thing you still have milk and eggs because you couldn't do this as a vegan." And I remember looking at him and saying, "No, you could. Like the amino acid profiles, like you can definitely do it. It's maybe a bit harder in South Africa, but you can do this." He was adamant. No, you can't. No, you can't. And a big part of my own personality is being told that you can't do something, then I kind of want to go and do it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, no, you definitely can. He's like, no, you couldn't. I promise you, give me a year and I will be bigger and stronger as a vegan compared to now. And so we made like a loose bet, and I went vegan. I did a bit of research, tried to find protein sources. In the beginning, I relied a lot on protein shakes because I had to learn what is seitan? Where do you find tofu? We don't have soy grills in South Africa. So those are kind of the big two ones that I had to rely on. And so that was the process that started that, and cholesterol magically improved. Blood pressure magically improved. Digestion got so good, and I felt a lot more cardiovascularly fit. And at that point, I sat one day and I realized, like, oh, but I'm not hurting animals anymore. And then it connected to the kid in me that never really liked hurting animals in the first place. I remember hunting and sitting there thinking, but something doesn't feel right, but I don't know how to explain it. And I finally could connect to that kid in me and understand that nobody has to suffer because of me anymore. I can actually help the world. And I understand the ecological impact about that. So that was another good thing that we could do. And I just realized, wow, this is amazing. Everything is good. And I kept getting stronger because, as we know, you get your amino acid profiles, you train really hard, you sleep well, you eat well. And we got stronger, got bigger. And a year later, I was like, I'm not going to stop. This is amazing. This executes on all the front I needed to. It executes on all the fronts I wanted to, which is that connection to animals, the connection to the kid in me. And here we are 5 years later. I feel better, stronger, healthier than ever.
And now one of your main goals is to be the biggest vegan on the planet, which I think you're certainly going to be in the running for. So yeah. So you say you're 6'3". What's your current body weight and what's kind of your goal?
So I just finished a bodybuilding prep, which I've unfortunately ended not the way that I wanted to. I got terribly ill because my wife's family that aren't vegan, and they went hunting into the forest, and my wife works abroad, so we don't see each other often. And she said she wants to go with the family. She'd like for me to come with. And so I went with, and I got terribly ill with food poisoning, which put me out of the running because we had to store food together. And typically, obviously, because I live alone, because my wife works abroad, there's no cross-contamination ever. So something happened in the forests. And so I just finished the cut. So at the moment, I'm 255 to 60 around there. But again, I'm not going to chase a weight because I don't think that's the best mindset, because I'm rather going to chase a look, just being the biggest. But round numbers, we're probably talking at my weight in the off season, it's not uncommon to be 340, 350. But again, that's a huge shot up, and it's not going to take a year. It's not going to take 2 years. It's probably going to take 3-5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of hard work, and I know that you put a ton of hard work into the gym, and I find that to be really inspiring. So
it's exciting. I'm excited.
Appreciate you pushing your limits and really testing those limits.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So yeah, could we maybe talk a little bit more about actually, I'd love to hear, what was the response from your family and your friends regarding veganism? Have you had any conversations with your father and brother about that? And what's been the response?
So my mother was probably the most accepting, I would say, because once I could explain to her the impact that soy can have on estrogen and menopause and things like that, she got very interested. She doesn't love the taste, and it's very hard for her to come by it in the country that she is, but she's quite intrigued. So that's a good part. My brother doesn't understand it at all. He's just insulting me. And at that point, like he's off the beat. He doesn't care. He's quite a bit overweight, and I've tried to help him so many times. And at some point, you just have to say, like, listen, I'm here to help you. I can show you the way, but I'm not going to try and beat open a locked door. You're on your own. And then my father, pretty much the same story exactly. My stepfather, unfortunately passed away during COVID in 2020, but he was accepting. He was very accepting. He's like, listen, I don't really understand what you're doing, but if it makes you happy, go do it. And I love him for it. And he's, when I grow up, I want to be like him one day. But at the same time, my friends, they were very reluctant at the beginning. There was insults like, oh, you're a lesbian, you're this, you're that. And they were really pushy. You're going to lose size. You're going to lose aggression. You're going to grow man boobs, this and that, etc. And then the longer we spent together, I have a lot of strength friends. I could hang out with them doing dumbbell, like doing RDLs, doing deadlifts, not perhaps as heavy, but 90%, I could hang with them. And eventually that respect that I had before kind of stuck around. And today it's still there. So nobody makes jokes anymore. Nobody bats an eye. If you rock up and everyone pulls out chicken and rice, you pull out your tofu, your seitan, and rice, your seitan, and sweet potato, nobody bats an eye. They might ask like, ooh, what's that? What's the texture of that? Can I try it? But now people come to me like, what can I do to improve cholesterol values? What can I do to improve cardiovascular fitness? It's like, listen, I know you're not very keen on this veganism thing, but replacing even your meats once or twice a week could help. It could. Here's the study. I don't like telling people like, oh, it's going to help end the conversation. Like, here's the study, go and read it. Please come back to me to discuss this. And so I have a lot of smarter friends who have tried to employ things like that. So the strength-based friends, sold. They don't insult me anymore. But then you go out to dinner with a bunch of friends, and your one friend will introduce you to one of her friends. Like, oh, he's also into fitness, but Daniel's a vegan, and you can see them double clutching like, because inevitably I'm bigger than them. And and they kind of like, where do you get your protein? And I'm like, yeah, it's simple, buddy. It's simple. So there's crescendos and nuances between everyone. Family, not incredibly sold. Friends, the smarter friends, they've come to a point where they accept it and they're willing to try a few things.
I find it so much easier to have conversations with like typical gym bros when you are bigger and stronger than them. So then there's not you don't tend to get much negativity from them. And typically, at least in my experience, people don't really do that so much in person anyways. It tends to more so be online. So I'm not sure if you've had that same experience, but it's a lot easier to insult someone when you're not face to face.
Definitely.
For anyone who wants to do that.
Definitely.
So
absolutely.
I think that that can help in a gym environment. But yeah, when you are lifting more than someone, if you look bigger than someone, it's not, I don't get the responses, oh, that can't work, because clearly the proof is standing in front of you. It's oh, what do you eat? Tell me more about that. So I get more kind of curiosity, and that's actually a really big driving force behind why I work out the way I do and why I enjoy building muscle and building strength, because I want to kind of feel that as a vegan, you kind of maybe feel like you have a chip on your shoulder and you have something to prove, and you want to show people that what is possible on a plant-based diet. So would you say that's kind of the driving force behind your fitness journey and what you want to accomplish?
It is a driving factor, not the driving factor, but absolutely it is a driving factor. I firmly believe you're going to talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. So if I'm going to try and give health advice to someone, I would never try and give health advice to someone that I wouldn't be willing to try myself. And so if I'm trying to get someone to improve their muscularity by building an extra 5 pounds of muscle mass, I have to be able to do that myself. And so that's definitely one aspect of it. But to your point of the veganism, absolutely. I feel that one of the big reasons that I train is so that I can show people that veganism and being muscular, being healthy, being fit, those things are possible, rather than saying it or trying to push people to veganism. I'm very content just standing there and having people come up to me like, how? Well, it's vegan. It's possible. And then they ask questions rather than trying to say or tell them facts. They ask questions and you just respond. And sometimes there are people that bring questions that cause a bit of head clashing, and that's important. I don't think that it should be all fact on fact and we lead every charge. There should be a bit of clash. There should be a bit of scientific conversations, a bit of like, what's the best vegan protein source? Is the vegan protein sources for a 21-year-old going to be the same for a 60-year-old? Do we need an isolate for a 61-year-old? So I think that's very, very important, because that is actually how we make veganism accessible to the masses. That's how we make veganism something that the masses can actually do. And I find that really, really fun. And so if I can charge that front helping people change their minds, absolutely.
I think our world needs more respectful dialogue, debate, and disagreement.
Yes.
Like, we do not have enough of that. And while I just do not really in any way understand or support, let's say, a carnivore diet, for example, I would appreciate having respectful kind of mutual dialogue. And in my experience, you get a lot of just straight hate, and things are just way too polarizing.
Yes.
And I think that's not productive for society. And I think at the end of the day, I think I can really get along with the majority of people in the population. And when you just are like out in a grocery store or out in a gym or just like in public meeting new people and interacting with new people, it's pretty rare that you have bad experiences where someone is just outright disrespectful or mean towards you. That's pretty rare in my experience. It's mostly online, and it's because they're latching on to a particular point of contention where they do not agree. Typically, in my experience and given what I post online, it relates to veganism, and people don't agree with that. People get really kind of riled up about that. And I just don't think that's productive. And it does not create a healthy society.
I agree wholeheartedly. You have to be able to discuss certain things. You have to be able to detach my opinion of you versus the opinion that you have about a certain thing. And I think that's really, really important. Case in point, my wife's not vegan. And so the only quote unquote rule we have in the house, if you want to cook fresh fish, tell me like an hour before so I can get out. Can't stand it. That's the only thing that I'm like, yeah, no, I'm out. And and I never push veganism upon her. If she has questions, you can taste my food, right? I don't push it. And then when we were hunting recently, she's like, yeah, she wants to try, or she wants to try and see what it looks like. She wants to experience it for the first time. And we got back home and she's like, I feel kind of uncomfortable with what I experienced the past couple of days. And it's like, So rather than pushing it, we introduced like the reality of it. It's like, this is what needs to happen. Life needs to end. That's how it looks when something dies. So rather than pushing it down her throat, it's just like, here it is, openly, like showed very kindly. And then slowly those things can start ticking, but it's a respectful manner. It's not pushing it. And I agree with you. If we were open, having scientific discussions or emotional discussions rather than insulting one another in every single part of the human population, we would improve.
Yeah, I really want to get deep into building muscle and strength. That's really your area of expertise, and I think you will share a lot of value with our audience in just a minute. But on the point of your wife not being vegan, what kind of, just, you kind of touched on it, but what kind of general tips and advice would you give to somebody whose partner is not vegan?
Well, first I have to give points to my wife. You have to have a really good partner. You have to have a partner that's understanding, that's supporting you, especially if you are, in my case, very keen on fitness. You have to have someone that's really supporting you. But to your point, if you have someone that's got a completely negative view about veganism, hates it, doesn't think it's going to work, isn't open-minded, the relationship might suffer. That's just a fact. But you could have an adult conversation with them, sit them down and say, listen, I'm not trying to insult you. This is my feelings toward a certain subject. This is what I want to discuss about a certain part. I'm not trying to get at you. Please understand this is my feelings towards a certain point. It's not of my feelings towards you. I like to discuss it. I like to discuss that this could be something we could do, but not necessarily something we have to do. I understand that you have feelings, so we're going to meet in the middle. I think that's very, very important, because just because we feel a certain way doesn't mean they have to feel a certain way. I understand that we're all human. And then just understanding that you might need to cook certain meals and then break the meal up, because the protein sources are going to be different. So if you're cooking spaghetti bolognese or something, then you might cook the spaghetti and the sauce separate, and at some point the sauce is going to split because they're going to have something and you're going to have soy curls. So just being realistic about such fronts, I think that's probably the biggest things. And then it comes down to associating yourself with respectful people. That's probably the biggest thing that you can do.
Very well said. All right, now it's time for Daniel's muscle and strength building masterclass. So let's hop in and just kind of start with some basics. So what is progressive overload? How does it drive muscle growth? And what kind of general kind of input do you have on the topic of progressive overload?
So progressive overload, simply put, is exposing the muscle to something that it hasn't been exposed to before. And with a combination of adequate rest, adequate protein intake, associated volume and load, then, so volume meaning the amount or the number of sets, working sets, and load meaning, of course, the weight on the bar. That's going to create an environment where the muscle reacts in a certain way that's going to elicit muscle protein synthesis to skyrocket, and it's going to allow for contractile tissue or muscle tissue to grow. So you're creating an external stressor. The body sees that, it reacts to that by partitioning nutrients to the muscle so that it can overcome that stressor in the future. So if you expose your muscle to 10 pounds this week, and in a few weeks you expose it to 10 pounds, but for 5 more reps, that's a new stressor that the body has to adjust to. Then it's 12 pounds, then it's 15 pounds. And so essentially you start building more and more muscle mass, you adapt. And that's really progressive overload in a nutshell.
So you're a really big, strong guy. What kind of general advice do you give to people who might not be interested in bodybuilding or getting as big and strong as possible, but understand the benefits of resistance training and want to start including that in their routine? So
important, especially for females. But really, really important. When we look at age, let's look at aging individuals. When we age, unfortunately, we end up losing a bit of muscle mass. Bone mass goes down, which means if you fall, there's less muscle mass covering the bone is a bit weaker, your risk of actually breaking a bone is far, far higher. And so what we also see is people who do carry a bit more muscle mass tend to have better posture. They tend to have less injuries, especially at work that has a physical work. If you move around boxes, but you pick dumbbells and barbells up that are slightly heavier than the boxes, it's unlikely that the boxes are going to cause you injuries. Plus, you learn how to move healthily. You also get a massive mental benefit. The mental benefits from training has been shown and illustrated in study after study after study. The cardiovascular fitness benefits, because if you're going to do weights, you're probably going to end up doing a bit of cardio at some point anyways. So that is phenomenal. Then we also get the hormonal response as well. Just the amount of cell regeneration that you can get from training really hard. So those are phenomenal. And then last other one that I want to talk about is just doing hard stuff makes you a better person. If you are going into the gym and you do a hard set of squats, you can do more in your life. You can get through harder stuff in your life. I mean, if you can get through pretty hard sets of squats and you get to work and they're like, okay, carry this up the stairs, there's nothing. So it has an impact. Plus, if you are, for instance, a mother, if you deadlift heavy weights, you can pick up your children. You're there for them. If you are a father, you can pick up your children. You can play with them. You can spend more time with them. Not only can you spend more time with them on a linear scale because you're healthier, you can survive for longer, but you can spend more actual time with them. You can run with them. If you have grandchildren, if you're very fit, well, guess what? You can run around with mom and dad and the kids to play with them. And those memories, they matter. They matter. Those are what makes us a human. And a lot of the clients that I've had before, one of their whys, their driving factors, I want to be able to hang around with my kids. I want to be able to hang around with my grandkids, play with them. And to see that actually come to fruition at the end is such a powerful thing.
Yeah, and I think it's really important I totally agree with everything you just said. And I think it's really important to emphasize that whether you are lifting 5 pounds or 500 pounds, like the same concepts apply with progressive overload, muscle protein synthesis, the importance of protein, the importance of form over everything. Yes. Like all of the same fundamentals apply. And it does not mean that you need to have the goal of getting as big and strong as possible. What the kind of baseline focus that we have with many of our clients is achieving a certain level of physical independence, and not just now, but also setting yourself up for long-term success, as you touched on with things like sarcopenia and just losing bone mass as you age. So setting yourself up for long-term success is incredibly important, and resistance training is so beneficial in helping you to accomplish that.
Absolutely.
So what about consuming protein? Like we hear a lot about protein, the importance of plant protein, but we also have certain people, I think primarily I've seen it a lot in the vegan world, people who might be a little bit more anti-protein. So what are your thoughts on protein and just some general recommendations regarding protein intake, and any thoughts on protein timing if you have that?
So, okay, let's start at the front. Protein timing, really not that important. It was really sold in the supplement area because it's going to make money. Not that important. It's probably the least important thing. But there is a nice pendulum. 1 protein feeding a day, probably not the best. 20 protein feedings, probably not the best. So what I typically tell people, how many times do you like to eat today? I like to eat 3 times a day. Cool. You take your protein intake for the day, divided by 3. Bob's your uncle. You get that much protein per meal. Fantastic. To my general thoughts on protein, we need protein as human beings. And the more physically active you are, plus the older we get, the more protein we would likely need. Physically active is because you get into a negative nitrogen balance, and nitrogen is the key compound that we find in protein. So that's the only place we can actually find nitrogen. So if you're very, very active, quite resistance training, or doing a ton of cardiovascular fitness, you would need quite a bit of protein. And then as we age, your ability to use amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. I try and tell my clients, if you were to imagine a brick wall as a protein, the individual bricks are the amino acids. Your ability to use those individual amino acids to where they need to slot into your walls in your body kind of downregulates as we age. It's a natural process. And so therefore muscle protein synthesis, or the actual production of protein, contractile tissue muscle in the body, also downregulates. So you would need slightly more protein to get to a similar yield compared to 20, 30 years ago. So those are the 2 fronts. General recommendations, I know the government's recommendation is quite low, and that's actually fairly accurate. if you don't train resistance training, you're not active at all, you don't need a ton of protein. And to be honest, most people would probably be able to eat that with a whole food plant-based diet, to be honest with you. And being able to hit that, very easy if you're not very active. Now, when we start incorporating a bit of resistance training, again, like I mentioned, you would need slightly more. My protein intake recommendations, I would say as little as needed, but as much as possible. And the reason for that is because it allows you to eat more other macronutrients, carbs, which can help you grow as well, because we know carbs are muscle protein sparing or protein sparing. Carbs also taste really good, and they're also really cheap. And those things matter. So as much as needed, as well as little as possible. For some people, that is 2 grams per kilogram. For some people, that's 1.8 grams per kilogram. I know me and someone else on the team discussed, and we looked at a study that came to the conclusion of 1.6 grams. But then when you look at the study, it was a meta-analysis. Only 5 of the 30 studies that they looked at were done on resistance-trained individuals. And every single one of them said more than 1.6. But the result of that study said 1.6 is enough. So you have to really go deep into the research and understand. So my recommendations for most people, I start them off at around 2 grams per kilogram or slightly less. And then I see if they get results. If they get results, fantastic. Let's try and lower it by 10 grams. Let's still getting optimal results, similar results. Cool. Let's lower it until you get to the point where we stop seeing great results or the similar results that we did before. Okay, let's bump it up slightly from there. Let's keep it there. And the only time that would ever change is if I get them into a great deficit, because we know as we are trying to lose weight, more protein will help us stay satiated. More protein will allow us to retain muscle mass. And then the last question that you have, the anti-protein argument, and I'm presuming you're referring to the argument of IGF-1 and mTOR. I'm very behind what Lane Norton says, Dr. Lane Norton. I think he's probably a doctor. It's the idea that a lot of those studies were done extremely short term. So mTOR and IGF increase when you walk up the stairs. It's going to increase regardless. It's going to increase all the time. My big argument is if you're concerned about the idea that IGF is potentially going to increase cancer, and that could potentially put a risk in your life, not having a high protein diet means having less muscle mass, which brings in cardiovascular risk, the risk for diabetes, the risk of breaking bones. So all those other risks to me outweigh the potential risk of cancer. And I've done a lot of research on this, and I couldn't find a lot of healthy, fit people getting cancer, far less than unhealthy people. Magic that. And I just feel that if you live healthy, you exercise, you do your cardio, you control your calories to an extent, but at the same time, when you go on holiday, let your hair down, have fun. I don't expect you to bring a scale to a wedding, but just live healthily, whole food plant-based diet if you can. If you need a bit of protein shakes, put in a bit of protein shakes. There's nothing wrong with the processed protein shake at all, and it could actually help you. So I think that is going to improve on all these other fronts, and the potential risk of IGF-1 and mTOR messing with you is so little compared in the studies that I've read. This outweighs this far and beyond.
Yeah, well stated. And the general recommendation that was established by the US and Canadian dietary reference intakes is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And it's a little under 0.4 grams per pound of body weight. And that is very low. And as you said, it's actually, if you eat a calorically sufficient diet, in my experience, even doing completely whole food plant-based, it's actually impossible to get under that target. Like, I have actually tried, because I've done an eating challenge to eat like Dr. Greger, and I was trying to keep my protein intake as low as possible, and I really struggled to get it under 100 grams a day.
Exactly.
Really, like, it was actually impossible. And I was trying to strategically consume low protein foods. So I think as you've kind of touched on, it's not about an obsession with protein. And in fact, as you also touched on, the goal is to consume as, not necessarily that the goal is to consume as little as possible, but there's no need to consume more than your body just needs at a baseline. So it's not about being obsessed with increasing your protein intake and trying to get in a bunch of protein shakes every day. That is not at all the goal, but the goal is to sufficiently provide your body with adequate protein such that it supports your health and fitness goals, and it sets you up for long-term success. So I think it's really important to understand that. And also it's hard to really parse out individual things within scientific literature and understand, okay, protein, how does it affect every single thing in your body? And it's but the research behind the importance of maintaining a higher protein intake is really quite clear. And it's not about being obsessed with protein, but it's about understanding that a higher protein diet has many benefits.
The one thing that I would want to say there, the two people that the protein recommendations are kind of odd for is perhaps the people that are unfortunately severely obese. If you are 340 pounds, I didn't expect you to eat 340 grams of protein a day.
Yep.
And if your body fat is 60%, that's a bit excessive. So you would need some help with that. But conversely, people will often come back to me and say like, oh, but this athlete eats 270 grams of protein a day. Yeah, but they weigh 240 pounds at 6% body fat. That is massively different to yourself. They are almost entirely muscle. They are gigantic. They need that much protein. Those people might seem like they have to focus or obsess about protein. It's just because they have to consume so much, but they're completely apart from the average individual. So that's just one other thing that I'd like to add.
Yeah, that's important. And some people who maybe have kidney issues also might need to be a little bit more mindful of that. But I will emphasize that there's a big difference between animal protein and plant protein.
Absolutely.
So if you consume lots of animal protein, it induces a kind of mode in your body known as hyperfiltration that really stresses your kidneys, but consuming an equivalent amount of plant protein doesn't have the same effect. So there is a really big difference between animal protein and plant protein. And I think lots of vegans who are very anti-animal protein for good reason, well beyond the ethical side. We also have lots of health implications of consuming animal protein. So that makes sense, but those concerns should not be brought over to plant protein. Yeah. So anyways, what about some other dietary considerations for vegans who are working to build muscle beyond protein?
So as you mentioned earlier, adequate nutrients, just eating enough. So you have to actually eat to build new muscle tissue, because you're essentially trying to build more of you that doesn't exist. And females go through this beautiful process, or people who can give birth, where they build a whole new human tissue body in their body. And it's this process that's like world renowned. When people are pregnant, like people stand in awe of what's happening. And you're trying to build a fraction of that. It still requires a ton of work. You have to eat quite a bit of food, and you have to eat good quality food. So this is an argument of calorie is a calorie to an extent, but calories from a protein versus calories from pure fat or even a saturated fat or a trans fat, vastly different. And so you have to understand that the quality of food that you take in matters, how that food digests for yourself matters. Just because I eat a certain protein and excel at it doesn't mean it's going to be the same for you. You can digest tofu extremely well. I suffer from tofu, for instance. And so we have to understand that you and I can be very different, but we can still reach the same goals. Just because we're different doesn't mean we can't hang out. And so that's another important consideration to have. Getting adequate fiber, making sure your digestion is going to be on top of things, and then just making it your own. Understanding that the big thing is consistency. The big thing is consistency. When trying to build muscle mass, even more so when trying to lose adipose tissue, I believe it's about consistency. Consuming adequate calories for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, progressive overload in the gym, getting quality sleep. But the big thing is just consuming enough food. And then the quality of food matters quite a bit, and then just making it your own.
Well said. It is one thing to tell people that you need to consume more food and eat more, but there are lots of people who struggle with that. And I've seen this kind of primarily from females that I've worked with, and I'm sure you have as well. So how do you kind of walk through that conversation with, let's say, a woman who is concerned about increasing her calories?
Oh, Leif, that's a beautiful question. First and foremost, I have this hard rule that if I'm going to make a change like that, it's not over text. It's over a call, because I want to see their reaction. I want to see how they react. I want to see, are they reacting with anxiety, so we can talk to them. Because essentially, this is a part of their life. It's not their entire life. So that's the first thing that I like to do. And then from there, I'm going to maintain understanding the science. Being able to explain the science to them does help, because it at least covers one aspect of it. And then explaining that we have to do those things in order to create new muscle tissue, increasing your calories very slowly. That's one thing that we can do. And of course, you can also look at the aspect of whether or not they'd like to increase their calories in one meal, perhaps, if they are in the mindset of that. Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to give you an extra 50 calories a day, which in you and I maybe not seem like a lot. But if I'm having a client that has never been told in their entire life to eat more, that's a big ask. And so what I might say, okay, I'm not going to ask you to eat 550 calories every day extra, but I'm going to tell you to have a dessert on Saturday. So the weekly calories is increased slightly. Is that the most optimal for muscle growth? Perhaps not, but it's taking them in the right direction. And so again, we look at the science, understand the science. This is the best way, okay, but this is what my client's reality is. Let's find the middle point. And so that's one way that I've definitely taken it, taking a very slow approach, constantly checking in, being in touch with our feelings, discussing those feelings. And I won't mention the name, but I've had a client who came to me and has never been told in their life to eat more. They've always been told, be skinny, be skinny, be skinny. And they were eating 1,200 calories. At the moment, I think they're close to 2,000. They're leaner. They have abs now. They're stronger. They're happier. They're enjoying their food. They've gotten away from always tracking. Sometimes we check in on a Monday. It's like, hey, I had pizza and stuff over the weekend. Didn't track it. Weight didn't really shift. I feel fine. I feel great. Never could have done this before. I had wine with my husband. I feel fantastic. And so it's about trusting that process. But I understand that trusting that process is such an easy thing to say. So the one thing that I will say is take your time, discuss your feelings. Just because you have a feeling doesn't necessarily mean it's always valid, because sometimes we overreact, as I do as well. But if you have a feeling, it's worth discussing. Discuss it with the people around you. If you have a coach, discuss it and trust the process. And slow, steady can win the race.
So you're just an absolute wealth of knowledge, and you're such a compassionate, kind of down-to-earth guy. But I'm sure people have had the experience before of seeing you. You're this big, strong guy. You got tattoos, and how do you kind of build connections with people that you're working with who don't maybe who might be perhaps a little intimidated by what your fitness goals are and how you look and stuff? Is that ever something you have to kind of work through, and how do you build that?
It definitely is something that I work through. One thing that I will say for the VSA, it's not that apparent really when I get to meet new clients. It's rarely
I'm glad
apparent.
to hear that.
Yeah, they're very interested but never scared away. That's one really good thing. I do get it in public, people stare sometimes, but in the VSA not often. The one thing that I will explain is we're all human. Take an interest into them and they'll take an interest into you. Be there for them. Ask them how they're doing, how their husband or wife is doing. Be there for them, and be, as you pointed out brilliantly in a team meeting yesterday, be transparent. If you have a tough day, be transparent. In this recent bodybuilding prep, my wife pulled me aside one point and said, like, hey, I know you're going through prep, but you need to give me more attention. And instead of overreacting, instead of saying, oh, you're wrong, I'm doing this thing, you sit down and it's like, wow, this is a human being, the most important human being in my life. And you say, what can I do? And you go up to, it's like, listen, I'm going to execute on this one thing. I'm going to try and spend 5 minutes every morning before I grab my phone. And I'm going to spend that 5 minutes with you, just listening to you. And you start building from there. And for clients, it's about listening to them, understanding that they have a family, they have friends, they have their own dreams, and being there for them, supporting them. Because at the end of the day, if they feel supported and they feel like you're really in their corner, they don't have to fear you ever. I hope that nobody ever has to fear me. But at the same time, if you show, we have such a brilliant term for it in the company, and I've forgotten the term now accidentally, but if you show unwavering support for someone, the compassion just carries over, and people just realize like, hey, he may look scary, but it's actually very nice, and he wants the best for me. And there might be times where he pushes me to do something that I've never done before, such as eating a bit more, or perhaps taking a set to RPE 8. But then 10 weeks down the line, I'm stronger, I'm better for it. And so Coach Daniel can communicate with me and say like, hey, remember 10 weeks ago, like on the 13th of April, I said that I want you to start doing this, and you moved 100 pounds for deadlift for 3 reps, and now you're moving 130 pounds for 5 reps. We have to do sometimes things that are a bit scary. And of course, riding that line between being uncomfortable and being in pain, that's a very delicate line. Pain is bad and comfortable is sometimes good. I think that's very, very important. But to answer the gist of the question, show compassion for people, show that they don't need to be scared of you, show that you're there for them, you want the best for them. And to listen, actually sit and listen and respond with emotions. That's the best that you can do.
Yeah, love that. What are your general tips or your advice on training, like just the fundamentals, compound lifts, isolation lifts? What kind of general framework should people maybe consider following? What just general kind of training advice would you give to people?
So the very first thing is that not everyone is going to train the same. If you hate training with weights, find a different way. Like go swimming, go carry rucksacks, go trekking, you might need resistance in one shape or form, but Coach Wukash is a calisthenics athlete. I have no interest in doing a pull-up upside down. Zero, nothing. But he wants to do an iron cross. I can support him and say like, dude, that was so cool, but I have no interest in doing it. But he enjoys it. Conversely, I want to pull 360 kgs for a deadlift one day. He has no interest. So doing what makes you happy is going to play a huge role, because if you are happy doing something, you will most likely do it again and again and again. So that's the very first thing. Then in regards to training in general, it's going to be about understanding your goals as a person and then building the program to support that. So if you are trying to get pull-ups, or if you're trying to have a really strong muscular upper body, why would you need 2 leg day sessions a week? It kind of doesn't make sense. I would rather you partake some of that recovery and put it towards your actual goals. But if you have big overarching goals that are massive, as we've spoken at the retreat that just passed the VSA retreat in the Camp Pocono Mountains, I spoke to a client who has these massive goals, and it's so far away, they kind of get demotivated because they have nothing else to go for. Set smaller goals that build into that. So if I have a client that wants to get into powerlifting, well, then get to a point where you can squat fully without lifting your ankles. That's a small goal that builds into the big one. So that's another thing that I would do, just understanding your goals and then finding a structure that suits you best. There's so much contention about what's better, full body, upper, lower, bro or /pro split. Finding what works for you best and then see if you make progress. And if you make progress doing something, then nothing else really matters. So you might need to discuss with the people that have been around the fitness scene longer than you, or if you are lucky enough to have a coach, discuss it with your coach. But at the end of the day, whether you do full body, upper, lower, whatever you do, so if you are happy doing it, if you make progress doing it, then you're all good. Do I have some preconceived notions of what I think will probably work best? I do believe high intensity works a bit better than high volume based on the research. So get in, work hard, get out. If you train for 2 hours, if I can get that down to 45 minutes, that means I have so much more time to spend at home, to recover, to sleep, to eat. So that's one big thing that I have. I do like training at a higher frequency. Trying to recover as quickly as possible so I can train that muscle again. Really good for beginners. As you get more experience, that might be less because you can apply so much more intensity in your training. And then one thing that I will always recommend is cardio. A bit of cardio. I don't care what your age is. I don't care what your goal is. If you're trying to be the biggest on the planet, if you're a strongman, a bit of cardio goes a long, long way. You don't have to do high intensity. A bit of low intensity, steady state cardio is going to do phenomenal for all health metrics. That's the one thing I recommend for every single client, every single human being on the planet.
Yeah, well said. What really drives you in coaching? Like what do you love about coaching?
seeing people succeed, seeing people at the retreat coming up to me and saying like, wow, that one call you had on progressive overload changed my life. And it's just about being around human beings. I sometimes joke because I work night shift, so I can be there for my clients sometimes. And we get on company calls sometimes at like 9 o'clock at night. And I make a few jokes, and I notice I make more jokes than some of the other coaches. And I like to explain that's sometimes the first social interaction that I have in the day. And it's so nice to be around people that want to progress. I hate the idea of not progressing. I hate the idea of waking up tomorrow and being the same. I don't like the idea of going to bed at night and feeling like I didn't accomplish something. And if I can surround myself with only people who are like that, like all my clients want to improve. All my clients have a dream that they want to go behind. And if I can support them and get them to the top, yes, because their success doesn't take away from mine. Seeing my client who has severe back pain getting to a point where they can do an aerobics class, that doesn't take anything away from me. That brings me joy. That brings me happiness. Plus, I get to learn how to heal someone's back. And I'm very keen to learn. So I get to learn something new. But seeing people happy, being surrounded by people such as yourself who wants to improve, you want to grow the company, of course. That's inspiring to me. Coach Daphne, I was at the retreat. The retreat activity started around 7 o'clock in the morning. And so I would sneak off at like 4:30 to go and train quietly. I don't know if you know if I was allowed, but I'm breaking the rules. But I would go off at like 4:30 a.m. to go train quickly. And I would wake up and go make myself a cup of coffee. And I'd hear someone running. I'd turn around. It's Coach Daphne, and she's going for a run. I'm like, those are the kind of people that I want to be surrounded. It's people that just want to be better and want to improve. And doing it so veganism, we get to improve the planet as well.
Yeah, so well said. And that's really I think one of the fundamental things beyond veganism that really brings us all together, not just on our team, but also within our community, with our clients, is a focus on self-improvement and growth. And I think that has been so powerful in my life. And I think we just have a really special community of people who are like-minded in that way. And that inspires me. I love seeing, in fact, often the most inspiring people are the ones who are working to lose a lot of weight, yes, or the ones who are 76 and yes, they're trying to stay healthy and fit. And I love the diversity in our community, and just seeing people from all different backgrounds who are working together toward the common goal of self-improvement day after day. That's really inspiring to me.
That's one thing that I will say. Unfortunately, I get a lot of clients who are comfortable going to the gym, especially with weight training females. As you mentioned, you are a very fit young man. You are strong. You are driven. You would be intimidating in a gym. But you don't look down upon anyone. You perhaps look at the guy that's maybe like 10 pounds heavier than you, but stronger. You're like, what can I do to be like you? I want to be like, what are you doing that I'm not doing? But when I'm in the gym and I see perhaps an older lady getting in there, like slanging around some 5-pound dumbbells, I'm like, yeah, get it. And tomorrow she's picking up 6s. I'm like, oh yeah, get it. 6 is nice. I don't know her name. I just know she likes wearing purple. But she's at 6 pounds this week. It's really cool. It's fantastic. But we want to support people. We want to see success, because I think that once you get to that point where you realize someone else's success doesn't take away from your own, it's all good.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I'm not sure how much of our community you kind of were able to see just online before you applied to join our team, but what was kind of the driving force behind you deciding to apply to the vegan gym?
Well, we have that one page on our website that we discuss all the ethos that we have as a company. And I read through that. I was like, wow, this seems amazing. And at that point, I had like 5 different jobs. I was writing a ton of articles. I was not only working in the fitness segment, I was working in the luxury watch segment as well. And it was tiring at the same time, but you never felt like you had your feet stable. And that did start getting to me. I was getting to a point where I was considering getting married with my wife. So you want to make adult decisions. And I came across the VS and I read the ethos, and I watched a few videos about you and Anders online. It was kind of funny because in my language, both of your names mean something, including Elke also means something. So that was kind of funny. And
I'm not sure I've heard about that.
Right. So your name literally means body. So Leif means body.
Body?
Yes. But it's spelled differently, but it sounds the same.
I guess that's why I'm into fitness.
Yeah. Then Anders means something else. It literally means something else. And then Elke, you wouldn't say Elke, you would say Elke, but Elke means each. So that was really fun to me. And when I met your mom, I was like, how did this come up? How did this come across? And so I had a lovely discussion with Janine about that. And it was just really nice. But coming back to that one page we have on the website about the ethos, how we want to change the world, or how the company wants to change the world at that point, the kind of individual they're looking for. And at that point, I'd coached for quite a long time. And unfortunately, one of the companies that I coached for had a very, very too much of a sales-driven mind. I understand companies need to make money, but at some point they were starting to sell to like 13-year-olds. Like thousands and thousands of dollars to 13-year-olds and telling them, run to your mom, get the money. And that felt so uncomfortable. Like I'd rather send that person a message on Instagram, like, hey buddy, like, you're 13, go for a run, like eat these kind of foods, just don't eat too much candy. Like that's all you need to do. And it felt so uncomfortable. And to be then met by the VSA that had these beautiful things that we wanted to work on, that we wanted to execute on, I just thought I immediately have to apply. And I remember distinctly making Loom videos in my application.
I remember that. Yeah. That really stood out. I don't think anyone has ever done that.
Because it just seemed appropriate, because there was so much to discuss. And I think I made like 3-4 because I had the 5-minute cap. So I made like 3 or 4 just talking about these things because there was so much to get and you just can't type it out. And it transcended what I actually believed in. It met with everything that I believed in. And that's how I applied. And I got to hear back from the company a couple of days later, and I came to my wife and was like, the company actually replied. They're interested. Like, we should go for an interview. And then everything was just amazing since.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's really great to have you here. And
I appreciate
feel like this has come kind of full circle now that we're here together recording a podcast in the mountains of Pennsylvania.
I cannot explain to you how thankful I am. I spoke to Anders at the retreat, like the opportunities you've given me, not just from a career aspect, but from a human aspect to grow and to learn from you, to learn from Daphne, to learn from the other people on the team. The fact that we have calls, trying to improve the coaching team. Like, hey, this is something we're seeing more and more. Let's improve this. How do we help our clients? I cannot explain to you. I've never had that at a company before. And it's rarely that I ever hear that. So just kudos to you from a personal aspect. Thank you so, so much.
Well, you're very welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's just a few quick things to wrap up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on supplements. What are the general kind of takeaways there? So
supplements, they're called supplements for a reason. So typically there are 1 or 2 that you might need, but typically the less you take, the better. The more whole foods and things you can get in. There are a few studies to show that at least for vitamins and minerals, micronutrients, the pills aren't as sufficient as the whole foods. Plus, who doesn't like eating? So that's one thing. But when we talk about supplements, the first one that comes to mind, whether you are actually trying to increase muscle mass or just trying to improve brain function, is going to be creatine. Creatine monohydrate. Don't buy that stuff they try and sell you that's more expensive that you can't pronounce. The cheapest one is the best. It's probably the one instance in the universe where the cheapest one is the best.
Yeah.
So creatine monohydrate is one of the best things that we can take. As I mentioned, it can help with muscle growth, muscle development, strength, but it also has really good effects for brain function, especially amongst vegans and vegetarians, because we do not take creatine in from a dietary source. We do make creatine ourselves. And when we look at the studies, the brain has first dibs over creatine. So creatine would do monumental. I've recently introduced my mum to creatine. She's not a vegan, but she's experiencing less pain, slightly less back pain, slightly more back strength. And she's been suffering with back pain. So it's really, really good. And then obviously looking at a vegan aspect, if you're not taking in vitamin B12 from a dietary source, such as from nutritional yeast or something, then you might need to supplement it if needed. One thing is vitamin B12 can be stored in the liver to massive extents. It's one of the only vitamins. So if you immediately go vegan, you probably have quite a bit stored up in there that's going to last you quite a while. And then it's completely individual. I wish I could say like, oh, this one supplement is going to transform everyone, but it's so individual. I've got clients who need magnesium. I've got clients who had to pull back on magnesium. So I wish I could say like, well, this one thing is going to execute on everyone. That one thing is probably just going to be creatine. And then that's pretty much it. It's going to be so individual. And I guess some people associate protein supplementation as a supplement. Some people associate it as a food. It's beneficial. It's easy to go. It tastes relatively good. Get one that you can do the texture with. It's great in smoothies. It's easy to go with you, take along with you. Even those little RTD drinks, that we get here in the States. We don't get them in South Africa. They're brilliant. They're fantastic. They taste phenomenal. In fact, Janine bought us some the other day when we were moving stuff for her, and they were just fantastic. Like 30 grams of protein on the go. Wow, great.
Yeah. And certainly not every protein powder tastes good. So you need to find the ones that you like, and those drinks, I know what you're talking about, and those do taste pretty great. What about if I'm trying to find kind of my sweet spot for volume and intensity? What kind of general advice would you give to someone so I'm not overtraining, but also I'm not undertraining?
That's a whopper of a question.
Yeah.
Geez. So let's condense it. If you're not making progress, you're something wrong. And progress I would measure with, depending on whether you have specific sports requirements, but strength. If you're not getting stronger, you're doing something wrong. And then I typically ask my clients and myself 5 things. Am I eating at the correct number of calories? If you're in a severe deficit, you're not eating the correct amount of calories, you're not going to get stronger. We know that. Be realistic. Are we sleeping enough? That's point number 2. Sleep, massive driver. We know if you sleep less than 6 hours for 3 nights a week, fat loss is down by 50%, muscle growth is down by 60%. Then I'm going to look at whether or not I can handle my stress. If leading up to the retreat, your stress levels were sky high, probably your training wasn't as good as it could have been. That's normal. So we understand that. Be realistic. But if you cannot manage your stress, try and manage it as best as you can. Then I'm going to look at my water intake and hydration and things like that. And if I'm so inclined, I'm going to look at supplement intake. Am I using the correct amount? Am I using the correct amount and the correct kinds? And then if all of those fronts are good, then I look at volume. If I'm doing everything perfectly and I'm not getting stronger, pull your volume down slightly. Just ever so slightly, especially on things you're not making progress with. See if you improve. Still not improving, maybe bring your volume down slightly. And at that point, I'd start moving into nuances, depending on where you are in your journey, whether you need set intensifiers, whether or not we need to play around with nutrient partitioning, not protein partitioning, nutrient partitioning, such as if you have a particularly heavy squat day, then you can do calorie cycling and allow for more calories on the squat day because it's a taxing day. You eat more on that day. Whopper, you actually get stronger on that day. Well, you have more food. It makes sense. So that's the general front I would take.
What about some hydration strategies for ensuring that you are supporting muscle growth, overall health and fitness? What kind of general advice do you give regarding hydration?
The body has a brilliant way of measuring hydration. It's called thirst. And so if you're thirsty, then you need to drink water. So I'm thirsty right now. I probably need to drink some water. We've been sitting in the sun. And so that's the one thing. There hasn't been a single study ever saying, oh, you need to drink 2 liters or 50 ounces. I'm not quite sure what that is. But there's never been a study because you and I are different. We sweat at different rates. You and I have different genetics. You come from North America. I come from South Africa. We have different, where our cultures have taken us. So it's vastly different from person to person. The one thing that I would just say that if you are underhydrated, so there are certain things that you can do, like the squeeze test with your hand and your skin, cramping. So there are symptoms of dehydration. Well, then drink more. And then you get to a sweet spot where you notice like, hey, if I'm doing my daily schedule, I probably need 3 liters, 4 liters of water a day. But then just be honest with yourself. If you're going into a deficit, you're probably going to drink slightly more water because you're trying to combat hunger. Things like that. If it gets summer, you might need to drink slightly more. So just get like the baseline of how much you need to not experience any effects of dehydration, and then just adjust it accordingly based on where you are in your journey.
What advice would you give to someone who is struggling in their health and fitness journey? Maybe they just continue trying different diets and end up yo-yoing, or they're just struggling to remain consistent, or they're not exactly sure what they're doing wrong, but they're not seeing the results that they want to see. What kind of general advice would you give to someone who is struggling in their health and fitness journey?
So the first thing that I would say is go and talk to someone that you respect, that respects you, that maybe knows a bit more than you. It's always great to get another viewpoint. Just sitting with them, and like we said, don't get someone that's going to insult you. Get someone that's going to look at your training and say like, hey buddy, like you're doing 40 sets a session. That's way too much. I'm not trying to insult you, but not even you can recover from that. Bring it down. So that's the first thing. Talk to someone, talk to as many people as you can. Try to get from good quality people. Don't listen to every yobbo on the street. That said, So that's the first thing that I would do. And then consistency, things like that. I think one big thing that we always speak about is your why. Why do you want to change? What is the driving force behind this? Understanding that and trying to align that with your journey. So if you really, really, really want to be healthy so that you can be there for your family and things like that, then the Turkish get up is a really good workout that you like to do. And people are like, why would I want a Turkish get up? Well, it's quite literally the thing that you have to do when you fall down. It's the Turkish get up. You have to stand up. So put that into your training. So every time you do Turkish get ups, like, okay, I have to prepare for if this perhaps inevitably happens one day. Or such as I mentioned before, the mom picking up her kids, doing something like that aligns with your whys, with your goals, etc. And then one other thing that I like to employ is just breaking things down smaller and smaller and smaller into a step that you can realistically take. So for instance, if I go back to South Africa now, the first day, I'm going to train. Second day, my nutrition is going to be good. Third day, my sleep is going to be good. Fourth day, I'm perfectly where I was before I came to America. Good. But for someone else, that journey might be 3 weeks. That is okay. Take the time you need to follow the process you need to do. And so if you need to take 4 days to get back into training, do it. Choose the thing that you enjoy the most. If you really enjoy getting good quality food in at all times, do that first because it's the easiest. If you like doing something, you're more likely to do it. Frankly, I can eat the food that's perhaps not the best tasting or the healthiest an extra day, but I want to get back into training. Like training is really important to me. So that's the first thing that I'm going to execute on. That's my smallest step that I can take. Maybe my training won't be perfect because I'm going to be jet lagged because I have a very long flight back, but I'm going to do as much as I can, but not too much that's going to be negative. Do that. So break it down into smaller steps that's going to allow you to actually progress, and then take your time before adding a next step. If you're scared and you're not sure whether or not you can add in the next consistency parts into your progress, be very careful about adding that. Do something that you realistically can do. If you want to get to a point where you walk 10,000 steps and you're currently doing 2,000 steps, going from 2 to 5 is a huge ask. Go to 2,500 for a week, then 3,000 for a week, then 4,000 for 4 weeks. Oh, that was a whopper. That was a big change. That took me some time. Then slowly build that consistency. And then when life inevitably throws a spanner in the works, learn to understand to take a step off the plan rather than falling off the plan. If I know something's coming up, then I'm going to make a choice and say, it's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to do as much as I can, rather than thinking, I'm going to be perfect. I'm going to be perfect. And then the first day, it's not perfect. Oh, I'm off the track. I'm going to like, oh, what do I do now? Now I have to kind of emergency mode. But if I preempt and say, it's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to do as best as I can. So I've taken a step off the plan instead of falling off the plan. That has worked for my clients so many times. It's worked for myself so many times because you're realistic about it. You're realistic about what's going to happen, about life. And I think that's another brilliant tactic that we can use.
What great advice. Really appreciate you sharing your wealth of experience and knowledge with me and the rest of our audience. So thank you, Daniel, so much for your time. It's been great chatting with you, and hope that you got a ton of value from this episode. I certainly did, and I'm sure everyone watching did as well. So Daniel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a great day.
All right. If you enjoyed watching this episode of the Vegan Gym Podcast, please be sure that you're subscribed. We've got a ton of other amazing content coming, and we're working to level that up all the time. With that being said, we also have been striving to create the video versions of all these podcasts. So we have been recording these in video. This podcast has been recorded in video, so you can check those episodes out in the video format by heading to the Vegan Gym Podcast on YouTube. So just check out our YouTube channel by searching the Vegan Gym Podcast on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.